Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I'm going to be talking about all the content coming in Dawntrail and when to expect it. You know, one of the biggest pros and cons of Final Fantasy XIV is that it's very, very consistent. It means that sometimes we wish we could get things a little faster. It means when content doesn't last very long, that we have longer lulls, and we can practically predict those things. Anyone who's played the game as long as I have could probably make this list, and we'd all probably be pretty close to each other in what we predict it's going to be. But I wanted to give people who aren't used to this kind of thing an idea of what to expect in Dawntrail. Whether Endwalker was your first expansion and nothing's really set in stone for you yet, you don't know what to expect, or you're someone who's now choosing to start playing in Dawntrail, I figured giving you an exact idea of timelines, what to expect, when to expect it, would be interesting at the very least. Before we get going with this video, though, we have a sponsor, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. This free-to-play game lets you replay entries from the Final Fantasy VII series with a mix of updated retro graphics and modern remake-style graphics. Utilize its familiar ATB combat system to play through parts of Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, and even the new original First Soldier story. Enjoy the cast of old and new as you prepare yourself for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on February 29th. Fortunately, Yuffie was just added to the game along with a new story chapter and the return of the Sephiroth Critical Threat Challenge. Yuffie's pretty interesting. She's able to debuff opponents' elemental resistances and buff herself and allies very quickly, so she's going to be a great all-rounder that will fit into any team. Logging in as Yuffie now will grant her some weapons to start, plus during the campaign of her release, you're able to get all sorts of free weapon draws. There's even a limited time weapon draw that has an outfit for her that will be particularly useful, so starting right now would be a great idea if you're interested in trying it out. So if you want to try out Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis and support the channel, simply click the link in the description or use the QR code on the screen and give the game a shot. It's available on iOS, Android, and even Steam with the ability to link your data and continue where you left off on any platform. So again, be sure to try out that QR code or click the link and support the channel all in one. Thanks to Square Enix for sponsoring, and now let's get to the video. Now, before I start getting into the specific patches and the things that we know for certain, I want to at least mention the things that I can't say for certain, because every expansion always has something. And Endwalker actually has a chock full of things that we know for a fact won't be in the next expansion. You know, the quality of life is probably the number one thing. While we do know about like the double die channels, we know about the new features like, you know, the glasses, the new fashion accessory, and you can always bet that things like that are going to be updated. There's always things like, you know, stuff controller players are asking for, little ideas that have floated around for a long time, stuff that's inspired by third-party tools that have subsequently been banned and now entered into the game. You know, I'm sure that's going to happen a bunch in the expansion. But then there's also straight up like features like, you know, 6.x, they went back and added trusts and reworked like all of the old MSQ like dungeons and stuff. And I mean, you could probably predict that maybe the normal mode trials are going to be put into that, but you can't predict when, unless you want to follow the exact same schedule of, you know, like A Realm Reborn and then Heavensward. I guess you could try to go with that, but there's no guarantee that that actually happens. You also have stuff like adventure plates and portraits, which I'm sure will be updated in Dawntrail, but I can't predict when a feature like that is going to be added to the game. Just expect things like that to pop up periodically throughout the expansion. I'm also not super privy to crafter and gatherer changes. That even comes to like when certain gear is upgraded. That's very consistent, and there is a way to predict that, but it's just not one of my strengths, so I'm not going to be bringing up what to expect and when to expect it. They've even taken like mini patches, like add new crafting gathering features, take them away, you know, update the way that collectibles work. That's still technically all in the same vein. There's also Gold Saucer updates. We know Gold Saucer updates are coming. We don't know what they're going to be, but I mean, additional mini games and Leap of Faith maps, there's never been a consistency to that. So just expect those, even though they're not going to be named. A big one is housing updates. You know, we know they're raising the cap for the number of outdoor furnishings you can have, and we will probably get new housing wards at some point. But again, there's no way of knowing for certain when that stuff is going to happen until they tell us. There's also adding new furnishings, you know, like contest winners, aquarium fish, flower pots. That's just consistent. That's like every patch. There's seasonal events. There's the Moogle Tome events, which are usually 4 weeks before each patch. There's Big Fish. I don't know what the schedule is for that, but you can expect there's definitely going to be Big Fish. There's probably going to be sightseeing logs too. And there's also going to be UI updates like themes, you know, and I'm of course hoping we get some sort of social tab update at some point in Dawntrail, but these are things we can't time guarantee. And also there's unannounced content. There was mention back at the North American Fan Festival when they mentioned Deep Dungeon updates. that they weren't even 100% certain they were doing that versus developing all new battle content. So there might be a bunch of things in here that we don't know about yet. And that's exciting because I'm about to name a lot of things that we do know. So with that kind of disclaimer out of the way of other things you can expect that you won't hear me mention frequently, let's get into the actual schedule that I'm expecting for Dawntrail. All right, so Dawntrail's release is slated for some time during the summer. Normally by now we know the date, but they said they didn't want to say it for certain until they were sure they weren't going to have any sort of delay. So we might be finding out kind of late. My prediction that I did on my podcast, State of the Realm, was July 9th. I kind of disagree with myself now and I've looked at things, and I'm going to stick to it though. That's going to remain my prediction. So I'm going to be using that as a basis for some of the predictions I'm going to do later, but I'm also going to give you time frames, so whatever your prediction is, you can kind of, think into the future a little bit with that. But first we have 7.0 through 7.05. Now Final Fantasy XIV does like a 4-day early access period. You can start on the Friday before the official release, but there's no like PTR or like public beta event or anything like that specifically for playing Dawntrail content. You just get like a benchmark a few months before, and all the rest is just news that come from live letters, media tours, and stuff like that. So my prediction date would be, close to when everyone would be getting to play Dawntrail. And every expansion release is normally pretty standard. You're really in it to play the new story, level the new jobs, maybe in the case of this expansion, change your character appearance or something. But, you've got, 10 levels of main scenario fates, the level cap being raised. You have new fates and probably new items available with the fate gemstones. You have hunts, which we get like 4 of the S ranks right away, and then the double S rank, and maybe they'll do an update to that, who knows. And then you get all the A ranks and stuff, which are usually fun to try and kill when you're on your way up through the levels. And then they usually wait a little bit before they add the other 2 S ranks to the actual like starting areas that we have. It's probably right outside Tyrol, I'd imagine, would be getting, those hunts later. You also get treasure maps. We don't normally have access to very much. Sometimes the treasure map dungeon comes along the same patch as Savage, but they start getting added to the game at this point. Obviously crafting updates, gathering updates. There's 2 extreme trials on expansion release day. I mean, everything you saw at the start of Endwalker, that's the minimum of what to expect for Dawntrail's initial release. On top of that, we know we have female Hrothgar as a new character creation customization. We know we have the graphics update. We know we have the new jobs Viper and Pictomancer. We know about the quality of life updates of like the dual die channels and the raid tool, which I feel like has been forgotten already. They're giving us like an in-game like raid tool so you can actually strategize with stuff without going to an external website. And on top of that, you also have something that won't be there. A lot of people don't remember, but Unreal went away, which is basically like the upsynced, old extreme trials. That went away in 6.0 and didn't return until 6.1. So Unreal will actually be absent from this most likely, from 7.0 to 7.1. Maybe they surprise us, but expect it to not be there. So if you want any of the new rewards on the day of 7.1, you're going to want to make sure you have some fox leaves tucked away before 7.0 even releases. Now, 2 weeks after that is patch 7.01, which will introduce the normal mode version of the raid, which we now know is the Arcadian. Various updates and balances are normally here as well, some based on balancing that wasn't finished before release, and he'll usually tell us, Yoshi P that is, when an update is coming because, it just needed a couple extra weeks to cook. And then usually some based on player reception, but you rarely see big job changes in this patch. We've seen stuff like experience points from certain features being buffed, like dungeons, for example, 2 weeks into the expansion launch. Some visibility with quests and objectives, little things like that. It's really focused mostly around the normal mode version of the raid being released. And then another 2 weeks later, so in total 4 weeks after release, you get patch 7.05. Did I say 7.01 or 7.1 before? I meant to say 7.01, so hopefully that's what I said. 7.05, 4 weeks after release. That's the Savage mode release of the raid and is our first official endgame raid tier. That's going to come with the capped tombstones as well. That's going to come with new crafted gear, which you'll usually want day 1 going into the raid. And this is where you usually see a ton of job changes. It's not exclusively where all the job changes will be post-release. Sometimes there's a 0.06 or a 0.08 patch or something that has even more job changes for both PvE and PvP, mind you. But I mean, you're going to get some in 0.05 to smooth out anything before the raid tier itself is actually being played. Treasure dungeons normally introduced in 0.05. We know they're looking to add an additional type of treasure dungeon. You probably won't see that on the release version. This will probably be the doors version of the treasure maps that you're used to. But, I'm looking forward to the future bits. So, just figured I'd bring that up. And that's a pretty good summary of what to expect on expansion release. Now, if you're someone who is very much, I guess, narrow interested in terms of parts of the game, like if you only care about story, if you maybe care about crafting and gathering more than combat, you don't really care about the EX trials. Like the big problem with Final Fantasy XIV expansion launches has always been that they like to not do too much in terms of repeatable content. In their eyes, leveling a bunch of jobs, leveling crafting, leveling gathering, doing hunts, getting ready for the raid tier, farming the EX trial mods, like they create repeatable content, but it's not like there's anything crazy like a relic grind or some sort of really long thing you can get invested in for the entire first 19 to 20 weeks of the expansion. And they say that basically, they want people to feel like they can take their time. They know that a lot of people aren't like me. People are maybe playing 3 hours a night, a few times a week, maybe, and they know that takes, 50, 60 hours if they're watching the story. So they, extrapolate that. You've got months of content for the average person, not to mention the idea of leveling multiple jobs, checking out Picto, Viper, all that stuff. And now, even then, not everyone plays at the same pace, not everyone's the same skill level. So they kind of play to a lower common denominator there, in a sense that they don't give you a ton because they don't want people who aren't even through MSQ to think about all the things they can't do yet. So it's always been a major criticism for people, like me, who play too much. And I'm not saying you should cater to someone like me, but they rarely have something. Now, one thing they do normally have is a fate grind. Usually to get all the rewards from fates, you need to get your ranking in each zone up by doing fates. Not to mention, we did get the introduction of a fate mount this last expansion with Endwalker, where you basically turn in fate stones for a commendation, and you need like 100 of those in order to get a mount. And it was an insane grind if you were trying to do it without buying these little like scrolls that you need to buy. So if you are looking for something long-term, there are some objectives. It's just not as focused on content that specifically engages those things versus being a long-term effect of their usual content. The same goes for the hunt mount, I suppose. But yeah, that's it for the first 19 to 20 weeks of the expansion. Now, I say that because Final Fantasy XIV has had very consistent patch releases minus a few particular times. Now, the first patch after an expansion, if things were to go horribly wrong, they would delay it. They have done it before, and thus the 0.1 patch is not set to this. But normally, you're looking at 19 weeks after release, which would mean with my July 9th prediction, I think that puts it at November 19th, and that would be patch 7.1. Now, this, of course, has the usual trimmings. I'm going to say this every time. Main scenario quest, side quest, whatever. There's a bunch of things in that kind of usual trimming section that you can't predict for sure. There's a lot of more major features that you can predict, so I'm going to focus on those. An EX trial of the 7.0 main scenario boss that is always in the 0.1 patch that has been 100% consistent. And hopefully they do a better job than they did in Endwalker on that one. Now, speaking of EX trials, Unreal is normally reintroduced here, which means a reward is added. Now, in Endwalker, they not only added a reward exclusive to Unreal, or at least, it was added when Unreal was brought back, but they also took a reward that was exclusive to, I believe, Chloe's Wondrous Tales at this time as well. So it was pretty interesting to see that. But, whatever EX trial they want to make Unreal, that's what they'll do here. There will, of course, be a new dungeon. I don't know why I accidentally wrote down dungeons like it's ever going to be plural again. It won't. And then there's the 24-player raid, Echoes of Vana'diel Part 1. I got my whole prediction going for that. We're going to be doing a ton of videos separate, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. A lot of big balance changes in 0.1, and there's a very good reason for that. PvE and PvP, we don't really know what they're planning on doing with the seasons or the series in terms of expansion release. They said they didn't want to do anything major PvP-wise in the initial expansion release, so that's why I didn't really mention it before. We don't even know if there's really going to be a series. Are they going to make it absent like they did Unreal because they don't want people to have to get through MSQ and level the series and level all the jobs? It seems pretty likely. Same with season, so this might actually be the first PvP season and series of patch 7.x, I suppose. We are told we are getting a new Frontlines map at some point. There's no telling when that's going to happen, but 7.1 is actually a fairly safe bet. We've gotten a lot of PvP map additions in the 0.1 patch historically, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen here, as well as hopefully some sweeping PvP updates to a bunch of other things that are already in the game. Maybe return of some old maps they promised us would come back at some point. Now, if there are role quests, I don't think they've said anything about role quests. Maybe they did in like passing. I don't even remember it. If they do role quests in 7.0, then a joint role quest in 7.1 wouldn't be too surprising. That's what they did in Endwalker, so we'll go based on that. It could just be in the actual expansion release as well, but I'll put that in here. And then you have various other usual updates, new fashion accessories, the glasses and umbrellas, UI updates, quality of life. It's hard to say because Endwalker had all those other things, so just stuff that's not content, but may affect the way you enjoy the game. I mean, for some people, this is content. Glam is content. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, stuff like that, there's no way I could predict. Then you have patch 7.11, which will be probably a few more job changes, but more importantly, the first ultimate of Dawntrail, which is Futures Rewritten Ultimate, or just Eden Ultimate, the Shadowbringers raid series. I'm dreading that, man. I got a whole separate video about that, so not going to get into it. Patch 7.15 is going to be new side story quests like Hildebrand. There could be other ones as well. For certain, the tribal quests will be in patch 7.15. Custom deliveries. Again, just so many little things that can sometimes just boil down to like 30 minutes a week, but they add up. So I got to mention them at some point. 0.11 is normally 2 weeks after the expansion release, and 0.15 is... there's not a consistent number. It's between 8 to 10 weeks. 8's kind of the consistent one, but I think in Endwalker it was closer to 10. So just keep that range in mind. That's you're not looking at another 4 weeks, you're looking at about double that or a little more. Now there are other things like the raid tier unlocking and 7.18 and all that stuff, and there are like normal mode unlocking before this, but I'm going to move on to the next major patch, patch 7.2. Now I say this one will be 19 or 20 weeks after the previous major patch. Something they started doing in Endwalker was, first of all, they added 2 weeks onto the dev cycle. It used to be 17 weeks, now it's 19. But they also started giving their developers an extra week off in winter and summer. So because my previous prediction, I think no matter what, this patch is likely to be a 20-week patch because no matter what your predicted date is, it's probably going to go through the holiday season, patch 7.1 to 7.2. So, but funnily enough, if my prediction ends up being right, this would probably be April 1st. That would be a wild time. Main scenario, side quest, balance changes, a new capped tome because it's 0.2. New capped tomes are added in all the even numbered patches. So always bear that in mind. The Arcadian second tier normal mode, and hopefully they keep it so that Savage will unlock a week later. It won't even have a patch. The game won't even go down for that. They've just been making Savage unlock a week later, which I approve of, but there's ways to improve that system. A brand new trial series and an EX version of this first trial that they're going to add to it, which means a whole new side story starting up here as well. New Unreal, new dungeon. Now we get into some other stuff. A new PvP series, of course, a new PvP season, depends on how they handle that. But this is where we start seeing some of the stuff they've been talking about in Fan Festival. It's very likely that Cosmic Exploration could start in patch 7.2. Cosmic Exploration, we're going to other planets, and it's likely to be crafting and gathering content based on what it's inspired off of, Ishgard Restoration, as well as the diadem, and the picture itself is just full of crafters and gatherers. So that's probably going to be a large-scale crafting and gathering related content. They might do some crazy stuff. Maybe they do something like Saint of the Firmament again, where you had to compete against other players to earn a once per major patch cycle chance at basically being recognized as a top contributor. It was very, very hard to be a Saint of the Firmament, and I wonder if they'll do that again, or if they'll deem it maybe a little too much. Maybe they just make like a really high number, and if you contribute at least that much, you get that title, and it's still kind of the same idea, but we'll see. That's just me sidetracking a bit. Then you have patch 6.21, unlikely to have anything important, mostly bug fixes and stuff, and patch 6.25, which is likely to be our first introduction of a relic. Now, there's a lot of things that could actually happen in 6.25. I don't know why I started with the relic. There's the possibility of a field operation here, like Eureka or Bosia. Eureka started in a 0.25, but Bosia started in a 0.35. I'm going to predict that this won't happen until the 0.35, but I feel like it's worth at least mentioning here. That also means it's likely to be tied to the new relic weapons, but I wouldn't be surprised if no matter what, the first step of the relic is here. Just a very easy step, basically no grind step, complete a quest, maybe turn in some tomes, not too unlike what we had for our first step in the Endwalker 1. I don't expect that to be the same way the entire way through this time. They mentioned variant and criterion were returning. Too excited here. And that's very likely to be here as well. They really need to revamp the reward structure for those, especially because that is a major thing. At this point, you're looking at 8 to 10 weeks after the expansion launch, and you can start easing up on how much gear you want people to have at this point. So hopefully they've been listening to the feedback on those, but we know they're continuing that, and this was when it first released an Endwalker, so fair prediction. New tribe quest, a gathering tribe most likely, new Hildebrand, other side story quests, whatever they decide to add, and other various updates and changes that, again, we can't predict. Then another 19 to 20 weeks later, I'm going to throw the 20 weeks in there because it's in the middle of summer most likely, and that would be, based on my prediction, potentially August 12th. It's a possibility, at least. 7.3, new main scenario, side quest, balance changes, PvP series, seasons, all that stuff. Echoes of Vana'diel Part 2, so the second part of the Final Fantasy XI 24-man raid series. Another new trial, another extreme version of said trial. New Unreal, new dungeon. You know, it's funny, I actually just remembered that in patch 5.25, actually, going back to Shadowbringers, we had a bonus extreme trial in place of an exploration zone. So I wonder if that could happen. Just sidebar, that maybe happens in 0.25 again. Not saying it will, not confident in that at all. But back to 7.3, new dungeon, new Unreal, cosmic exploration. If it's not out by 0.2, it'll probably be out by 0.3, whether it be 0.2 or 2.5 or 3 or 3.5. I'm guessing on the patch, to be honest. New treasure map dungeon would be here. And since we don't think this will be the roulette wheel, if it is, then I would expect another treasure map update later, probably in the 0.4 or 0.5 patch, or maybe they even do a new treasure map dungeon in 0.2 and then another one in 0.4. We don't know, but we know they're planning on maybe doing something other than the roulette wheel. So this would be the latest I'd expect that addition in any capacity. And those are, again, all the consistent things. Again, if you played Endwalker, you kind of know what the base patches all have. Now, for patch 7.31, if there is one, that would be potentially the second ultimate. I think they'll do a 0.31 ultimate and not a 0.51 ultimate, but that's just me. I'm going to throw this in here. That would not be a surprise to see, and that would be another 2 weeks after the patch launch. Then patch 7.35 has the potential to be one of the scariest updates. Like, I don't think they can do all this in 7.35. I don't think they can. I think it just goes against what they always say, like when they want to stagger content. So we may see a bit of a breakup here in this part of the prediction. So if they do a deep dungeon, which they did mention at FanFest, this would be when they add it. Now, they also said they may do a brand new type of battle content instead, or maybe even in addition to it. Who knows? So let's put a pin in that, I suppose. Field exploration for sure will be by 0.35. They can't wait till any later for that, and they never have. 0.45 and 0.55, just not a good idea at that point. Tribal quests, the crafting tribe, likely to be the final tribal quest, unless they do an allied one in 0.55. Blue Mage update, I would bet 0.35 is when we see the Blue Mage update. It could be 0.45, but 0.35 is a possibility as well. And I think maybe with how stacked this is looking, they might want to put it in 0.45. New Hildebrand, new relic weapon step, new craft. And honestly, I think at this point, crafter and gatherer relics get added. I think this is, at this point, Splendorous tools were already, Splendorous tools might have even been the patch before. I don't remember when Splendorous tools were added. Like I said, crafting and gathering, not usually my thing. But for sure, by now, they would have crafter and gatherer relics if they're doing that again. So we're going to put a pin in that as well. Then 19, 20 weeks after that, and keep in mind, when I say 19 to 20 weeks after the previous patch, I mean the major patch, like 0.3 to 0.4 to 0.5, not like 0.35 to 0.4. So I would put that in early January. I think this is where my schedule kind of falls apart, because it would technically, the 19 weeks would fall on like December 23rd. Based on my prediction, and even then the 20 weeks wouldn't be much better than that. So this one might actually be a little bit later. If they start the expansion later, this whole like thought of mine goes out the window, but kind of puts a problem in my patch cycle. If I end up being right, then something weird's going to happen around 7.4. MSQ, side quest, balance changes, new capped tome, new PvP series season, all that stuff. So seasons technically have been rolling like 2 at a time at this point. It's only the series that are for sure just 1 per major patch. And then we have the finale of the Arcadian, normal mode at least, with Savage a week later, our final Savage raid tier. New trial, new extreme, new Unreal, new dungeon, cosmic exploration, and then in 0.45 you have variant, criterion, which should theoretically make its return here if they do 3 again and they do them in the same patches. 0.25, 0.45, and 0.55, then, you know, we can go off that. Maybe they do something different. Maybe they do like 0.08 and 0.25 and then 0.45. Who knows? Field exploration, relic weapon updates, Blue Mage update. If it didn't happen in 0.35, it has to happen before 0.45. If it happens in 0.45, then Beastmaster would be 0.55, which I actually do think will be when Beastmaster is introduced. But Beastmaster, our new limited job, could be in as early as 0.45 as well. Then you have Hildebrand, you have Crafter Gather Relic stuff. So again, just a whole wall of updates to stuff you've expected, plus, you know, the new stuff, the new that comes in. And then another 19, 20 weeks later, in around May-ish would be my prediction for 7.5, May of 2026, mind you. MSQ Part 1 side quests and only minor balance changes. At this point, if they're doing any balance changes, they're really waiting until the next expansion at that point. PvP stuff, Echoes of Vanadil, 24-man raid finale, new trial, and extreme, and that should be the last one, which means the combined extreme trial amount for collecting them all. New Unreal, new dungeon, Cosmic Exploration finale, and then 7.55 variant and criterion, field exploration and relic, crafter and gather and relic, Beastmaster for sure by this point, tribal quest finale potentially, other side story quest finales, MSQ Part 2, like, all of this stuff pretty much falls in line with what to expect. There's just more of it in Dawntrail. You know, all the things that have kind of been sprinkled throughout the different expansions are kind of all in Dawntrail all at once, or at least that's what they're telling us the plan is. So I'm going to be curious to see how they manage to pull a lot of this off. Because if this is what it looks like before we get the stuff I can't predict, that means with that stuff, it's going to get even a little bit nuttier. I mean, we don't know if they're going to do like updates to ocean fishing or, you know, any of the old contents people haven't gone back and done in a while. And there's really the points in between where you start to consider that kind of stuff. Did you never do Eureka? Did you never do Bosia? Did you never collect your triple triad cards, which will be getting added the entire time as well? And any achievements that they add for like capstoning stuff, like another triple triad achievement, another Blue Mage mount or title or whatever they add when they update that. There's all these little things. The more interest you have, the more these patches look like a juicy endeavor, at least for about half of the time between the patches. For those of you with more narrow interests, a lot of this stuff becomes monotony. And I totally understand that. And, you know, as Yoshi P says, you know, provide feedback. And if you're not happy, don't play. You know, and he's saying that in all earnesty because money talks. If you're not subscribing and they see a lot of people aren't subscribing, it forces them to change the way they think. So keep that in mind throughout Dawntrail. If what you're hearing here isn't exactly the most exciting thing because you've already lived it so many times, or you're just not interested in as many content types, you don't really care about stuff like variant, criterion, cosmic exploration field, all that stuff, it's worth at least thinking about it now. But the main scenario is the thing that I'm always excited about for 100% certain to see if I like it, don't like it. And everything else is time occupied for me. I like to take on challenges that not a lot of people take on, unless of course they take 7 years like that Leave Quest one. I ain't doing that. But I figured it would be fun just diving through what to expect throughout all of Dawntrail and to give you guys an idea about it for those not familiar. But that's going to be a wrap for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned. We'll be doing tons of overviews of stuff before Dawntrail content they're going to be introducing, how I feel, what they need to change for that stuff coming in. We got 6.55, we got the 16 collaboration, we got the Xbox beta, we got all sorts of stuff to keep us occupied, at least news-wise, while we wait for summer and whatever day it actually ends up being. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see all of you in the next video, and until then, take care.